but joy comes in the morning. And I was with somebody one time. We were waiting. Her father was getting ready to pass, and we were in the hospital waiting room. And so we were there throughout the night. And when we left that morning in the sunlight, and he had died, it just was a comfort to me. We grieved his loss, but we were so thankful that joy does come in the morning. And what that means to each individual person is different. What I'll tell you is kids grieve differently than adults. And one of the things that I often talk about when we're training for our camp that John Mark mentioned is talking about how adults, oftentimes we get stuck in a place, and our mood is here. Kids can be grieving with tears, and 1 minute later, out running and playing. And they can just, I call it bounce. They have the ability to bounce from grief back to joy or fun. But we're going to talk a little bit about some of those differences and how they do grieve. I wasn't sure if I was going or if this it's moving. I was like, am I moving? But we're going to start with just some truths. And you'll see and hear a little bit of repetition in different ways from Stephanie's talk, and probably then when Dora talks, she'll be repeating some of the same things. But there are truths that I think are important for you to recognize in grief. One, that it is a natural response to loss. Some people say normal. It doesn't always, normal is a relative term, but it is a natural response to loss. We'll address how you explain to kids. It is important for kids to be told about the death, and maybe even how it happened or what happened. We'll talk a little bit more about that because that's a delicate thing, and sometimes we want to protect, but sometimes we do it at the expense of our kids really understanding and knowing and being able to process that grief. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But number two, emotions experienced during grief are neither good or bad. And that's an important thing to also acknowledge, that it may be painful, it may be difficult, but it's not good or bad necessarily, they just are. Grief emotions will be dealt with now or later. I had mentioned that earlier when somebody was asking. And we do really believe that. We recognize that children truly need support to learn and practice healthy coping. And that really is to avoid some long-term challenges that they could potentially face. Fear of love, fear of abandonment, fear of change, and loneliness. They just can live in that if you've not helped them to be able to process some of that grief and why it happened, how it happened, and that it's not going to happen every day. When you don't want them to live in a fearful state. Number four, grief is an individualized experience. I think Stephanie definitely hit on this, but it is important to know that every child is going to grieve differently, and teen. I often tell a story, and they know I'm friends with these people, so they know I tell it. But they were twins. Their dad died. They were almost 4, I think, at the time, and did everything together, ran around together. But one of them, after he died, would walk around telling everybody she saw, my dad died. My dad died. And she just talked, and people would respond and say, oh, I'm so sorry. And the other one would be right there with her, but never said anything. And to this day is a little bit quieter than the older one. They're now in 13. But they were as different as could be how they were processing it. And I know without a doubt they were both grieving, and they were both processing, just in completely different ways, as siblings and as twins. Number 5, grief will not always be like it is in the beginning. Thank you, Lord, for that. Because it's hard. It is hard. And sometimes you just wonder, is it ever going to be easier? Is my heart ever going to stop hurting? We mentioned in the panel that loss will always be there. That person is gone, and you will feel that loss. But it does get better. It gets easier to take the steps one day, the next day, and to keep moving forward. Sometimes it takes a little while to get to that place, but it does get better. You're never going to forget. You're never going to stop missing that person. And we want our kids to know that we're so sad that they're gone. But we want to focus on, okay, how can we remember them? And how can we move forward in that? So there's a lot of misconceptions that we have. Some of those are based on how we were raised. Some of those are based on society and what society tells us. But it's important for us to kind of acknowledge some of these. Grief and mourning are predictable, orderly processes. I think Stephanie hit on that. Absolutely not. You never know when certain things are going to hit you. And one day may be really, really hard. And this is for kids that I'm addressing this as well. And then the next day they may have an easier day. Children, especially infants and toddlers, are too young to mourn. That is definitely a misconception. Even infants are able to sense, especially if a mama is stressed or hurting. And so they will react to that, but toddlers especially. And oftentimes, if you have any toddlers, we'll do whatever it takes to get your attention, good or bad. We're going to talk about behavior with them and how that impacts. Older children and teens mourn like little adults. That is not true either. They have their own way, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Children bounce back and their grief is short term. I don't really think that's accurate either. I think it is something that stays with them, but that they can healthfully continue their life and grow. And, my hope with a lot of people that I work with is to help them to know you can share some of your experiences later on in life that may help somebody else down the road. And hopefully there are people in their lives currently that are helping them. And so I want them to recognize, I am sorry you're having to go through this, but I hope you will use this for good and to help others. Childhood bereavement always leads to a maladjusted life, adult life. That is false as well. I will tell you, there are cases, and you may know people that have truly had maladjusted lives because of the grief that they experienced, the trauma that they experienced during childhood. That doesn't mean that they can't be helped. That doesn't mean that that can't be changed. But it is important to address those. Children are not affected by an adult's grief. That is false as well. It's not necessarily a negative thing. But it's important to know that how you respond and how you react and how you model your grief in front of your children is something they are watching. And if you don't talk about it with them, you are telling them, what? Don't talk about it. Yeah, it's not okay. Exactly. And so it is important to know that you want them to know how to grieve. And that it is okay to cry. This same family, they had a son that was a couple of years older than the twins. And at church, we all went to church together. I would often go up and check on their mom, and often she would cry while we were talking because she felt safe and she knew she could. Her son would immediately come over because she was crying. You know, it was like, what are you doing, Miss Janet? But he doesn't do that anymore. And he did learn, you know, that it's okay. And I would often say, it is okay for your mama to cry. But it was hard for him to see, and yet she was letting him know, this is okay, and you can cry too. Children are better off if they don't attend the funeral or memorial services. This is a really personal preference, but I will tell you that my personal opinion, and you take this for what it's worth because it is my personal opinion, is that it is very important for children to be there. Now, it doesn't mean that they have to sit through the whole service. With this particular family, we had identified some people that they were close to and said, if they need to leave before it's all over, because we knew it was going to be long, help them get out. You know, they'll go out and they can, but they all three started in the building, in the auditorium where the service was. But I think I mentioned earlier that I grew up where, you know, going to a funeral was just part of what you did when somebody died. That is not the case, and I know that for a lot of people. I have friends that have said, I've never gone to a funeral, and I don't think I ever could. And it makes me a little bit sad because I know the importance and what that meant to me for the people that did come, and even the kids that came. So it is important we strongly encourage to even involve them as much as you can, whether that be let them pick a song, let them say something if they feel like it, or draw a picture and show that. But let them be a part of that opportunity to talk and to share and to honor their loved one. Speaking of a loved one, we'll reopen up children's wounds. That, again, is a misconception. Oftentimes, it's a good thing for them to have somebody that will say, man, I bet you're, missing your dad today because I'm missing him today, and I wish he could be here to watch this. This particular boy, when he was baptized, I did say that. I said, all I could think about today was how happy I know your dad is in heaven right now, watching you make that commitment. And to him, that was a blessing. I mean, he told me, because I acknowledged his dad at this time after 15 years. Actually, it was probably 10 years. Children must be protected and shielded from grief and pain. I know we want to shield our kids, but there are some things that they need to experience. And if we can comfort them, if we can walk with them and help them, that's great. But you can't protect them from everything. And if you have kids, you know that without a doubt. Over time, children will get over their loss. They don't get over it. They walk with it. And we have a camp that was mentioned, and part of that camp is spending time honoring their parent, because there's not a lot of opportunities to do that. But in this camp, we do it every day. We're there 3 days, and we have many different opportunities that we do that with them, because for a lot of them, they feel very alone. They go back to school and they think nobody understands. Nobody has, everybody else has their dad still here. Even if they are divorced and they only see him, every other week, their dad is here. My dad is not. And at camp, it's different. Moms, dads, grandparents, who the death has been, but every single person that comes to that camp, every child, knows that they are not alone, because everybody at that camp knows what it is to grieve the death of somebody important, and somebody that they love. All right, some reactions that you'll see in children. We've talked about this a little bit earlier, that they will respond more by behavior than by words. So those are some cues for you. And it is important, especially when they're misbehaving or doing things, that you're thinking, why in the world are you doing this? To try to figure out what is this behavior about? And again, they may not be able to identify, well, I'm really sad today. But you can ask some of those questions, and that's okay. You can say, well, I can tell something's hurting you right now because you're doing things that you would not normally do. Children may not be public with their mourning, but they do grieve, just like the two twins that I was telling you about. Children don't always understand why they hurt, but they know that they hurt. And you can say, are you hurting? And they will be able to say, yeah, not sure why, but something's hurting my heart. Children tend to act out their emotions of protest, again, behavior. Children sometimes avoid talking about the loss because of the pain. We see this often at camp, especially the first night we have them put picture of their loved one up on a memory board. And when they do that, we give them the opportunity to speak if they choose to. That first night, there are many generally that don't speak. They have their big buddy or somebody share. Some do, but not everyone does. By the last Saturday night, then we do a candle lighting in memory. It's a luminary that we send out on the water once everybody has lit their candles. But as they light their candle, again, they have the opportunity to speak. And almost everybody speaks on that night because they have gotten to a place where they are comfortable sharing and they know everybody else is going to share too, which is a wonderful and actually quite emotional thing to see and to be a part of. So what do kids experience in loss? It's a lot of things that you would already know and see, from shock and numbness to denial, guilt and magical thinking. We'll touch on just a little bit later as well, but this is kind of age-related, where they can almost think of death as a powerful being. Regression, you may see that almost at any age. When we get ready for camp, we have teens that sometimes the parents may tell us they're wetting the bed again. So there are a lot of signs that may come through: panic, withdrawal, loss of interest in activities. A lot of times you see that more so in teens. Behavior changes, health problems, fear and distrust, depression, definitely see anxiety. How children understand. Okay, so we're going to quickly go through this. So from 3 to 5, and we'll include toddlers in this too, if they can speak even, but death is just a word. So they don't truly understand the concept. They just know death is a word that you've said somebody died. They don't necessarily understand that it's permanent. Again, they're thinking, oh, so maybe they'll be here tomorrow. My mother-in-law used to tell me my husband's sister died. She was 12 and he was 3. And she said for weeks after Susie died, at night when she'd say his prayers with him, he would pray, Lord, please bring Susie back. And she said, I couldn't hardly get words out. And so finally she just had to tell him at one point, a couple months later, Susie's not coming back. But he just didn't grasp that concept. They fear separation more than death. And it's the fact that they're not there. Aren't they coming back? It's not the fear of death necessarily. They can understand death and grief in very concrete terms, which really, depending on the age, is the word. Some of the signs with infants and toddlers of stress that you can identify are crying uncontrollably, rocking back and forth, excessive sleep, head banging, or repetitive, meaningless actions. In the preschoolers, more the 3 to 5-year-olds, again, it's the crying or the clinging that they may not have been doing, so it's a little bit of regression there. thumb sucking, exaggerated fears, bedwetting, temper tantrums. From the 6 to 9-year-olds is when they first start beginning to understand death is permanent. They still don't have that concept down, but they can begin to think, okay, this is something that may be forever, whatever forever is in their mind. They do not understand that death comes to everyone, including them. So this is an isolated incident, basically. They can personify death, this is where they do, as the powerful being. And it's that magical thinking of it is going to be, somebody else. With that, what I wanted to make sure that I address with you is that this is also a time where they may potentially think it's something they thought or they said that caused the death, because it's that magical thinking. So you do want to be aware of things that they say, because sometimes they'll go so far as to say, well, it's because I told him I hated him, or this or that. And so it's important to acknowledge that you don't have control over that this is what happens in life. And everybody is going to die at some point, and you didn't have any control or anything to do with that. Signs, again, frequent whining, fearlessness, nightmares, bedwetting. Nightmares are a big one that you may see after a death with this age. Refusal to eat or overeat. We, a lot of times when we get ready to have somebody attend our support group, GriefWorks, we have them fill out a paper that essentially does address that, what are some of the things that you've experienced since your person died? And eating is one of them, sleeping is one of them, stomach aches, we talk about, do you have any things, headaches, stomach aches, and in almost with every, Stephanie could acknowledge this, but almost always there are headaches, stomach aches, something to that effect. Eating, not always, but sometimes you will see that they just can't even, they stop eating when it's somebody that has been eating a lot, or they're the opposite. When they get to the 10 to 12 year age, and again, I'm using numbers, you have to look at it as from a maturity standpoint, and where they are in that, because sometimes you can be 12 and act like you're 9, whatever. But death is becoming a little more permanent, personal, and universal, that it's impacting everybody. At this age, often they're very fascinated with the gruesome or shocking details about a death. So, if they know some of the details of it, they may be telling everybody, well, this is what happened. Because they're a little bit fascinated with it because of their age and where they are mentally. This is also another age where they struggle, oftentimes, and you see it probably more so at this age in school, because they can't focus often. Kind of like we had talked about before, that, you lose, it's kind of the brain fog. I think that was the term Dora used. This is true with kids. They're easily distracted. They often act out. Or you think they're just daydreaming, where are you? Are you over here? And often there's frequent illness. What I will tell you with the distracted and inability to focus is you do want to be cautious if you have kids this age, that somebody doesn't start saying, oh, they must have ADHD or whatever, because there's a lot of similarities in some of the behavior that happens with that. Yes, ma'am. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. You can do that too. I was going to stop right there. Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. Okay, 12 to 19. So this is a pretty big span here, but they have almost achieved that understanding of the adult understanding of death. They also know they will die. And I hesitate on that because if you have a teen, you know that they feel invincible. You know, they can, for many, they feel like they can do anything until they have somebody that they know in their school that dies. And it can rock their world because it is a face-to-face that, wow, I could have been, you know, diving off of the cliff with my friends and not come back up. You know, there are certain things. That's an example of when my kids were in high school, that was one of the experiences that they had. But it is one of those things that they are then at that point kind of recognizing and acknowledging that they will also die. They do experience incredibly intense emotions about death and spend a lot of time, they can spend a lot of time thinking about it. Frequent aggression, you will see often with teens, withdrawal, insomnia, excessive sleeping, destructive or risky behavior. This really is an age that you do want to make sure that you are watching and, you know, with any of your children, but the risky behavior is, it just seems like that's something that a lot of kids and teens will do, whether that be experimenting drugs, alcohol, just dangerous behavior. So you want to keep track of them. Sometimes it's hard as parents or grandparents, if you're raising your kids too, to be able to focus on the children because you are still dealing with so much of your own grief, and it is hard. So, you know, I encourage you to make sure that you are attempting to do that, or have somebody who's close to them that you can say, I need you to keep an eye on them and help me and tell me if I need to address some things. Problems at school or at home, and again, that can be attendance. Often they're missing school, and they just are depressed or tired or sick, you know, which is the hypochondria type stuff. And sometimes it is a lot of uncontrolled emotions. So this somewhat mimics, although I don't think I was trying to remember how many Warden has, but I think this was the one that kind of mimics, yeah, this one has 6. But Stephanie kind of hit some of these, but again, these are needs of children and teens in grief. So you need to acknowledge the reality of the death. I am a believer in telling even a child how somebody died. That being said, you do have to be very careful the words that you choose. You don't want to say, oh, they were sick. So then the next time they're sick, they're thinking, am I going to die? You know, I mean, that may seem like a simple thing, but you do want to explain, you know, they died because their body, you know, stopped working. And it may be because they had cancer, because they had, you know, but you may want to be a little more specific than general in that. You also, I definitely understand that depending on how old they are, you don't want to tell them, you know, this is what suicide is, you know, and they died by suicide necessarily. But it is important to help them to understand they did take their own life. And you say it in a term, in a way that they can understand. That being said, you also have to be prepared for the questions that are going to come back at you. So what does that mean again? And how does that work? And what I'm going to tell you is, you guys probably have experienced this before, but when a child asks a question, sometimes we want to give a dissertation and explain everything. I'm going to tell you, you answer the question. And then if they have another one, you answer that one. But probably 8 times out of 10, they're going to ask a question, you're going to answer, and then they're going to go play. And so it's, you know, my husband and I have some pretty funny stories of how we have, you know, explain, and they're like, well, all I wanted to know was this. And it was like, okay. But be prepared for the questions. Be as honest as you can with them, and tell them as much as you think they can understand. What I will tell you is that oftentimes kids will come to our group and the parent will say they don't know that their dad died of suicide. And then we will be in group and the child or the teen will say, well, my mom doesn't know, but I know, blah, blah, blah. And that's because they've got Aunt Sally or Cousin Susie or a friend that they've been listening. They may not be speaking, but they are listening to everything around them. And they know a lot more than what you're telling them. And so again, you're telling them by not telling them that they're not supposed to know, or you don't want them to know, or it hurts you for them to know. That was a lot in one little sentence there. There's no hurrying grief, which Stephanie definitely addressed. I mean, you just can't hurry it. You do want to embrace the pain of loss. You want to help them remember the person who died. Funerals are very important, but they do not provide closure. They are the starting point for that. And I love Alan Wolfelt, who I call him the guru of grief. He's written a lot of books, does a lot of speaking, but he has often talked about the importance of funerals to tell the story and to allow people to share who that person was and who that person was in his life, your life, and to be able to have people that may have only known them in this little circle to know a broader picture of who they are. And so they are important. It's an important place to start that mourning process. Children and teens live in fear that their loved one will be forgotten. Yes, thank you. Okay, I need to hurry. Okay, she gave me the high sign. So here's a big one, developing a new identity. They have to understand that they will always be their daddy's little girl or grandma's grandson. But it is a question for a lot of kids, who am I? If I'm not their son, if I'm not their granddaughter, who am I? And so helping them to know you're still loved and this is who you are. You will always be your dad's daughter. All right, let me see. Let's go. Searching for meaning, which they will definitely do, receiving ongoing support from others. So this is a big one of trying to figure out when do your kids need outside support. And what I'll say is that, again, it kind of comes back to what we had talked about earlier. If you are recognizing they cannot get up and go to school, or they won't go to school, you know, there may be some things or they're not functioning, they're not able to function in the daily activities. There may be a need to, you know, however short and brief, as Dora mentioned, let them come in and talk to somebody. We do have a support group for kids ages 5 to 18, which is specific for children who've experienced a death of a loved one. We talk a lot about different emotions and different things you deal with in grief. And so this would be an ideal place to refer them to if you have friends or family. So how do we help? Again, we be available, we listen, and don't judge. You know, your kids need for you to be the safe space, the trusted space, to be able to say and do whatever they need to do. Now, if they're cussing a blue streak, you know, you may say, okay, could you choose another word because you know I don't like that. But I'm not saying just let them fly with it, but I am saying let them feel free to share and to speak. You want to validate their feelings, you want to reassure them. You can share your feelings of loss, even if you cry. You know, it is okay to cry in front of them and let them know how you're feeling. I think there's importance in that, in modeling that is an okay, and this is a safe space to do that. You want to create especially when you have opportunities to talk with them or if they have questions, a safe atmosphere and environment. I always say that, it seemed like when I was driving and it was dark and my kids were in the back seat, that's when they shot the hardest questions to me, because it was like, okay, I don't have to look at her, but I can ask her, and it's dark. But you don't have to find a dark space for them to do that, but find a safe environment and a secure place for them to be able to share, and maybe make time for that. If you think, man, I think they need to talk, find a space for that and make time for that. Try to not protect or shield, except for when needed, your children, because part of their grieving process is feeling that pain and learning how to cope and deal with that experience and those emotions. Understand, I know am I out of time? Okay, good. So understand, this is a big one. Throughout their life, there are going to be times when this grief hits them again and hits them hard at times. And so there are certain things, we call them grief bursts, but there are certain things that may trigger some of those emotions. And they could be things that going into it that it's going to be hard. There may be other times, like for me, I was an adult. It had been several years since my dad died. We were at one of the elementary schools. Boy Scouts were doing a flag ceremony, and they started playing taps. I had to walk away because that was one of the last conversations that I'd had with my dad and what he wanted. And he wanted taps played at the cemetery, which we did. But I was totally blindsided by it because I was like, man, I could feel the emotion coming from my toes all the way to my eyes. So just know that is going to change. And for your kids in particular, when graduation comes, on their wedding day, there are lots of times that it is going to revisit and hit. And just try to support as much as you can. Another big thing is to maintain daily routine, if you can, especially right after a death. And that's hard because you got everybody and their brother at your house, all kinds of things going on. But as much of a routine as you can keep gives them a sense of security. Find resources for your child and for yourself. Again, GriefWorks is a wonderful place to do that. This is one of my favorites. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All these things are gone forever. What a joyous time that will be. Question?
All this is all about children in regards to death. Would it be the same thing as like loss not involving death?
Dora will address some of that. It's coming. But absolutely. Loss is huge. And, it could be, if you have teens, a loss of a boyfriend, you would think he might have died. Absolutely. So we always, one of our staff used to always say, death of a marriage. And so he used the word death because it is such a powerful word. And so absolutely, although that dad is still here, that is an incredible loss of what family life looked like. Yeah, I would say you could use all of these for that. Mm-hmm. Other questions? Sorry, I had to go real fast at the end. Again, thank you all so much for being here and we're just honored to be able to speak to you and hope that you will reach out to us at Christian Works if there's anything that we can do. We do educations, we do crisis counseling, we do counseling in our offices, but we want to be a resource for you. So please know that, and if we can help in any way, let us know.